In
7月
July,
份，国民经济
national
延
economy
续
is still
恢复态势。
recovering.
7月份，面对国际环
In
境
the
更
midst
趋
of
复
the
杂严
complex
峻和
international
国内疫情
environment
散
and the
发多
sporadic
发的不利局
outbreak of
面，
COVID-19
在以习近平
domestically,
同志
and
为
under
核
the
心的
leadership
党
of
中央坚
CPC
强领导
Central
下，
Committee with Xi
各地区
Jinping at
各部
its
门
core,
坚
different
持稳中
departments
求进工
are
作总基
taking
调，
steady
认真
efforts
贯彻
to
落实
implement
党中央、国务
the
院决策部
CPC
署，
Central
高
Committee's
效统筹疫
instructions.
情防
We
控
have
和经济社会发
striken a
展，
balance between
有
national
力实施
economic
稳经济
development
一揽子
and
政策措
the
施，
COVID-19
生
prevention
产
and
供给
control.
继续恢复，
Production and
就
supply
业物价
resumed.
总体
Prices
平
and
稳，
employment
对外
are
贸易增
steady.
势良好，
Foreign
民生保
trade
障有力有
is
效，
picking up,
经济
and
延
people's
续恢复
livelihood
态势。
is being improved.
工业生产稳定增长，装备制造业和高技术制造业增长较快。
In
7月份
July,
全国规模以上工业
the
增加值
industrial
同比
increment
增长
increased by
3.8%，
3.8% year on
以上
year.
月
That's
回落 0.1
0.1 percentage points
环比
lower
增长
than
0.38%。
the last year,
分三大
than
门
the
类
last
看，
month.
采
And
矿业
as to
增
the
加
mining
值同
industry,
比
it
增长
increased by
8.1%，
8.1% year on year.
制造业增
Manufacturing
长
up by
2.7%，
2.9%.
电力、
Power,
热力、
heating,
燃气和
and
水
water
及
supplies
水生
and
产和
other
供应业增长
related utilities
9.5%，
increased by
装备制造业、
9.5%.
高技术制
Advanced
造业增加值
manufacturing and
同比
high-tech
分别增长
manufacturing increased by
8.4% 和
8.4% and
5.9%，
5.9% year on
分
year.
别比规模以上工业增
That's
加值
faster
快
than
4.6%
the
和 2.1%
industry increment above
分经济类
designated
型
level.
看，国有控股企业
And
增
the
加值同
SOEs
比增长
increased by
5.4%，
5.4%. The
股份制企业
shareholding
增长
companies increased by
4.4%，
4.4%.
外商及
Foreign
保台
invested
商投资企
companies
业增长
increased by
1.9%，
1.9%.
私
Private
营企业增
enterprises
长
up by
1.5%。
1.5%.
分产品看，
By these
新能源
segments
汽车、
of
太阳能
products,
电池等
the
绿色智能
green
产
and
品产
renewable
量同比
energy
分别增
industries
长
increased by
112.7% 和
112%
33.9%。
and
一至7
30%.
月份，全国规模以上
In the
工业
first
增加
7
值
months,
同
the
比增长
industry
3.5%，
increment
比
increased
1到
by
6月份加快
3.5%,
0.1个百分点。
0.1
7
percentage
月份制造业采购
higher
经理指
than
数
the
为
first 6 months.
49%， 企业生产活动经营预期指数为52%。1至6月份，全国规模以上工业企业实现利润42702亿元，同比增长1%。2. 服务业继续恢复，现代服务业增势较好。7月份，全国服务业生产指数同比增长0.6%， 比上月回落0.7个百分点。其中，信息传输、软件和信息技术服务业、金融业生产指数分别增长10.3%和4.9%。1至7月份，全国服务业生产指数同比下降0.3%，降幅比1至6月份收窄0.1个百分点。1至6月份，规模以上服务业企业营业收入同比增长4.4%，其中信息传输、软件和信息技术服务业、卫生和社会工作、科学研究和技术服务业企业分别增长8.3%、7.2%、6.8%。7月份服务业商务活动指数为52.8%，其中铁路运输、航空运输、住宿、餐饮、电信广播电视及卫星传输服务、生态保护及公共设施管理、文化体育娱乐等行业商务活动指数位于55%以上的较高景气区间。从市场预期看，服务业业务活动预期指数为58.8%。3. 市场销售持续增长，升级类商品销售较为活跃。7月份社会消费品零售总额35870亿元，同比增长2.7%，比上月回落0.4个百分点，环比增长0.27%。按经营单位所在地分，城镇消费品零售额31205亿元，同比增长2.7%。乡村消费品零售额4665亿元，增长2.6%。按消费类型分，商品零售额32176亿元，同比增长3.2%。餐饮收入3674亿元，下降1.5%。基本生活消费稳定增长，限额以上单位粮油食品类、饮料类商品零售额分别增长6.2%和3.0%。升级类商品销售较快增长，限额以上单位金银珠宝类、文化办公用品类、家用电器和音像器材类商品零售额分别增长22.1% 11.5%和7.1%。1到7月份，社会消费品零售总额24万6302亿元，同比下降0.2%，降幅比1至6月份收窄0.5个百分点。全国网上零售额7万3224亿元，增长3.2%，其中实物商品网上零售额6万3153亿元，增长5.7%，占社会消费品零售总额的比重为25.6%。4. 固定资产投资规模扩大，高技术产业投资较快增长。1至7月份，全国固定资产投资不含农户31万9812亿元，同比增长5.7%，比1至6月份回落0.4个百分点。7月份环比增长0.16%。分领域看，基础设施投资同比增长7.4%，制造业投资增长9.9%，房地产开发投资下降6.4%。全国商品房销售面积7亿8178万平方米，同比下降23.1%。商品房销售额7万5763亿元，下降28.8%。分产业看，第一产业投资同比增长2.4%，第二产业投资增长10.4%，第三产业投资增长3.7%，民间投资增长2.7%，高技术产业投资增长20.2%。其中，高技术制造业和高技术服务业投资分别增长22.9%和14.3%。高技术制造业中，电子及通信设备制造业、医疗仪器设备及仪器仪表制造业投资分别增长27.5%和26.6%。
Among the high-tech service industry, the high-tech conversion industry investment is up by 16.2%. In the social sector investment, the total increase ratio is 14.5%. Healthcare and education were up by 83% and 22% respectively. In the foreign trade, the commodity export and import volume registered 3.8 trillion RMB yuan, up by 16.6%. Export registered 2.24 trillion RMB yuan, up by 23.9%. Import registered over 1 trillion, up as well. And between export and import, there was a difference of about 60 million RMB yuan. In the first 7 months, the total trade volume was 23 trillion, up by 11.4%. Export was 13 trillion, up by 14.7%. Import registered 234 billion RMB yuan, up by 15.3%. The general trade accounted for 64.3% of the total export and import in the first 7 months. That's 23 percentage points higher than last year. Private enterprises contributed to 50% of the total. And mechanical devices export increased by 11%, accounting for 56.6% of the total export and import. 6. Employment is stable, and the unemployment ratio is going downward. There were 7.83 million new jobs created, and the unemployment ratio was 5.4%. That's 0.1 percentage point lower than the last month. The migrant workers' unemployment ratio is 5.1%. For the age group of 16 to 24 and 25 to 59, the unemployment ratio was 15.9% and 15.3%. The big cities' unemployment ratio is 5.6%. And the average working hours is 48 hours per week nationwide. 7th, the industrial prices are going down continuously. In July, the CPI increased by 27% year-on-year. The increase range was 0.2% larger than the last month. And by different segments, the food increased by 47%, and clothing up by 0.7%, housing up by 0.7%, daily necessities up by 11.4%, transportation up by 6.1%, education by 1.5%, and healthcare 0.6 percentage higher. All the other goods 0.9% higher. Grains up by 3.4%, vegetables up by 12.9%, fruits up by 16.9%, pork up by 22%. Deducting energy price and food price, the core CPI increased by 15.8%. That's 0.2 percentage lower than last month. In the first 7 months, the year-on-year CPI increase ratio was 1.8%. In July, the out-factory price of industrial products was 1.9 percentage lower than last month, and the purchase price of industrial products decreased by 0.9% month-on-month, and in the first 7 months, the out-factory price, purchase price increased by 7.2% and 9.8% year-on-year respectively. In general, we have efficiently controlled the pandemic and guaranteed economic recovery, but still, we have to be clear-minded that the stagflation is an urgent risk in the world, so we must be continuously guided by Xi Jinping's thoughts on socialism in this new era, and we must strike a balance between safe and sound economic development and social development. We must combine economic recovery and COVID-19 prevention and control. Especially, we must ride along with this critical period of economic recovery so as to further stabilize prices and improve people's livelihood. We must ensure economic performance within a reasonable range. Thank you, Deputy Director Fu. Now let's open the floor to questions and answers. Thank you from CMG. In July, there have been some sporadic outbreaks of COVID-19 in China, and the hot weather in southern China has been a heavy blow to our economy. So what's your take on the economic performance in July alone? And in the next stage, how do you plan to further facilitate sustainable economic recovery and development? Thank you for the questions. Since July, there have been some sporadic positive cases. And, as you said, the hot season is a bad news for the economy in southern China. In general, domestic economic situation is complex, and globally, we are all under the pressure of stagflation and inflation. And added by the heavy rains and hot weather, to stabilize economic performance is ever more difficult. So in face of complexities, different departments have been implementing the instructions of CPC Central Committee and the State Council. We must stabilize our economic development and pursue high-quality growth. We must efficiently balance between economic recovery and pandemic prevention and control. We have ushered in a basket of economic policies so as to further strengthen our economy. Our economic structure is improving and we have ensured people's livelihood. So we have witnessed the resilience of our economy. First of all, the production and demand are reviving their indicators. For example, the decrease ratio of the industry has been narrowed down. The service production index decreased by 0.3%. The decrease ratio was 0.1% lower than that in June. In the first 7 months, the commodities export and the import increased year-on-year by 16.4%, and retail sales was 0.5% lower than the last month. So if we look at the export, import, social consumption, fixed assets investment, their year-on-year growth ratio is all positive. And secondly, the policies of stabilizing employment is taking effect. The unemployment ratio in July was 5.4%, 0.1 percentage lower than the last month. In the big cities, the unemployment ratio was 5.6%, 0.2 percentage lower than the last month. As to consumer price index, it is mildly increasing. In July, the year-on-year growth ratio of CPI was 2.7%. That's lower than the expected target of 3% all year round. As to the core CPI, the year-on-year increase ratio was 0.8%, quite stable. Third, the economic upgrading is continuing. The new drivers of economic upgrading and restructuring are showcasing, and we have seen the investment on the high technology sector increasing by 12.2% in the first 7 months. Information technology, software, and data services increase ratio was 12.1%, and the retail sales online was 0.1 percentage higher than the last month. Social transformation is speeding up. New NEV solar power panels increased by 112.7% and 33.9% respectively year-on-year. In face of the international tight supply of energy and peaking energy prices, domestically we are under huge pressure of ensuring energy supply. The crude oil, coal increased by 11.5%, 3.7%, and 5.4% for the natural gas. We have stabilized the energy prices domestically. We also ensure the transportation services. Domestically, logistics have been improved. In the first 7 months, the goods and commodity transportation volume narrowed down by 0.1%, and in the ports, the throughput increased as well. 5. People's livelihood have been improved. We have basically met people's basic needs. And in the first 7 months, the grains, oil, and beverage retail sales increased by 9.4% and 7.4% respectively. And we have more inputs into people's livelihood sectors, for example, in education and healthcare. The investment increased by 8.2% and 33% respectively. In general, in July, our economic is recovering and we have stable economic performance, but we must be minded that there are different factors. So the economic recovery is slowing down. We must further cement the fundamentals of our economic recovery. So we must execute the instructions of the CPC Central Committee to coordinate between economic and social development and pandemic prevention and control. We must meet domestic demand and stabilize production line and supply chain, and we must hold to the bottom line of our development so as to pursue sustainable and healthy economic development. Next question. From CNBC, I have 2 questions. The first one is about industry and consumption lower than expected by the economists. So, what are the reasons for the underperformance? Is it influenced by the real estate market? And secondly, as to employment, I would ask about the youngsters' employment. Are we embracing a new turning point for the youngsters' employment? Thank you for your question. I could see that you're concerned about the real estate market and its influence over industry and consumption. And the second question is about employment. Since early 2022, the real estate market is on a downward trend. Investment in the real estate market is going down as well. Consumption sectors have been impacted. But in general, people are all paying attention to the real estate market because it's a very large area and it's very influential over a wider area. For the economic development and people's livelihood, it's very influential. We are committed to the policy of housing for living, not for speculation. We have introduced a series of policies to stabilize the real estate market. So we are seeing a slow downward trend of real estate prices. Commercial houses have gone down by 23.1% in July. But the decrease ratio is less than the ratio in the first 5 months this year. If we look at the investment in the first 7 months, investment in real estate market go down by 6.4%. But the decrease ratio is narrowed down. In some places, we have seen some delivery of real estate projects. But the majority of projects have a construction period of 2 years. And they have stable progress made in construction, so the risks are well controlled. Even though the real estate market is on a downward trend, and I think this market is almost hitting the bottom with improved mechanism and the policies taking effect, the real estate market is expected to pick up and have healthy development. So its impact over the general economy will be improved. As to employment, this year, employment is under huge pressure. Unemployment ratio in April was as high as 6.1%. With effective control of pandemic, the policies to stabilize employment were starting to show effects. So unemployment ratio was going down to 5.4% in July. And there are several features. First of all, the main group of job seekers are improving. The unemployment ratio for adults are down by 0.2% compared to the last month, approaching the level in the same time last year. Second of all, for the migrant workers, their employment situation is improving. The policies to support migrant workers are effective. The rural residents coming from elsewhere has a lower unemployment ratio. In April, because of the hit of the pandemic, the rural residents coming from elsewhere has a larger unemployment ratio than the other groups of people. But now with economic recovery, this special group's unemployment ratio has been below the average unemployment ratio. And if we look at the unemployment ratio in the big cities, the unemployment ratio was rising fast, very rapidly in the first several months because of the pandemic. But now it's improving. Unemployment ratio is shooting down. In July, that number was 5.6%. That's 0.2 percentage point lower than the last month. The youngsters are under pressure of finding a job. This year, the youngsters are seeing rising unemployment ratio. And July was the graduation season. A lot of graduates are coming to the workforce, pushing higher the unemployment ratio for the 14 to 20 for the 24-year-old unemployment ratio, it's up by 0.6 percentage points than last month. That's mainly due to the difficulties in the enterprises, especially in the tertiary industry, where the youngsters take up a larger proportion of the total workforce. For youngsters to enter into the workforce, they are prone to go to the stable posts. So there is a gap between their expectation and the actual supplies of the posts. I especially want to draw your attention to the fact that the unemployment ratio in July is lower than that in June. it's a little bit different than previous years, because in previous years, ever since July, the graduation season, the unemployment ratio in July is usually higher than that in June. But this year, it is reversed, and there are two factors to explain. First, in quarter two, because of the pandemic, employment is generally improving. And in April, we have been influenced by the general environment. For example, the unemployment ratio was 6.1%. For 25 to 59, the unemployment ratio was 5.3% in April. That's unexpected and exceptional. But gradually, with the economic recovery, the employment ratio is returning to normal. For the age group of 25 to 59 years old, the main workers, the unemployment ratio is 4.4% in July. Compared to its peak point, that's 1 percentage point lower than April, which stood at 5.3%. So for the age group of 25 to 59, the unemployment ratio is 0.2 percentage lower than last month in June. But previously, this main group of workers maintained a very stable unemployment ratio. But this year, it's very exceptional. This group has a downward unemployment ratio, contributing to the overall decrease of unemployment ratio on average. And for another, the graduates are seeking jobs earlier than before. This year, there is a large number of graduates. When they go to seek a job, they usually act earlier. And we have more supportive policies to help those youngsters finding a job. In July, this group of youngsters are not taking up a very large proportion of the total employment. Also, the migrant workers have lower unemployment ratio, contributing to the improvement of unemployment ratio on average. So in general, we are seeing the decreased unemployment ratio, but the structure is yet to be improved. Especially for the youngsters, the unemployment ratio is at a historical high. So we must continue to execute the basket of policies to improve the economic performance. We must supply more job posts and have more supportive measures to help those youngsters. Thank you. Next question. From Hongxin News. The pandemic was shocking and hitting the service industry. What is the recovery situation of service industry in July? And what's your take on the trend of the tertiary industry? With the restructuring of the economy, tertiary industry take up half of the total pie, so it's contributing more to our economy. This year, the service industry is hit by the pandemic, so its growth ratio was slowed down. As to July, the tertiary industry is recovering, but the momentum of recovery is slowed down. The service industry production index was down compared to the last month. For one thing, that's mainly because of the downward trend of the real estate market. The real estate market production index was down by 10.8%. Second of all, some tertiary industries are having the features of a large population gathering. So those industries are impacted by the pandemic. For example, exhibitions, conventions, industrial park services. Although the tertiary industry's recovery has been slowed down, the overall trend remains unchanged. With the restructuring of tertiary industry, the service industry has a lot of favorable conditions for continuous improvement. First of all, the modern service industry is surfacing. For example, online shopping, education, cloud tourism are enjoying larger demand, so there are more needs for those service industries. In July, information transmission software have a year-on-year increase of 10.3%. Transportation and the traveling services are improving as well in July, with the smooth logistics. The turnover of goods nationwide is better. Especially this is the summer season. We have seen higher tourism growth. In July, transportation, warehousing, postal services production indexes increased by 0.3% year-on-year. And against the backdrop of pandemic prevention and control, accommodation, catering businesses are booming. The catering and accommodation production index was 2.6% lower in terms of the decrease ratio compared to June. In July, the service industry commercial production index was lower than last month, but it's still enlarging in absolute terms. Among the 21 investigated industries, 16 industries are enlarging, including aviation services, accommodation and catering. The commercial activity index was up by 60%. Among all the industries, some service industries are maintaining continuous growth in the last 2 months. But of course, the partial outbreak of the pandemic is challenging the service industry. So we must continue to coordinate economic and social development and epidemic prevention and control. We must bring back the normal order and add up the effects of the financial policies to support the service industry. We also encourage innovative transformation of service industries in order to have high quality and stable service industry development. Next question. From Tianmu News, the pork price increased largely in July year-on-year. That's a new high in 2 years' time. So what's your take on the trend of pork price? And what's your take and forecast about CPI in the future? In July, CPI increased, mainly in the field of food. CPI was up by 2.7% year-on-year, 0.2 percentage points higher than last month. First of all, the food prices are going up rapidly. CPI increased by 6.3% for food. That's 0.4 percentage points higher than last month. The production volume of pigs have changed, so pork price was up by 20.2% year-on-year. Because of the hot season, the vegetables was up as well by 12.9%. Second of all, energy price increase ratio was down because of the international crude oil change. In July, the energy prices was up by 24.6% and 26.7% respectively. And for the service industries, the increase ratio is going down. The market supply is sufficient, and demand is recovering. Some prices are going down, deducted the energy price, the CPI is going down compared to last month. Service industry is up by 0.7%. If we look at the next stage, although we are under some price pressure, the prices are stabilized and we have some favorable conditions. First of all, sufficient supplies domestically. The agricultural production is having harvest for several years. In the summer season this year, we have increased the total production. For the main industrial consumptions, the production is also ranking among the top in the world. So we have sufficient supply, and the relevant prices are seeing only mild increase. And for the pork price, we don't have the ground for continuous rising of the pork price. Now the price of the pork increase is within a reasonable range. We will continue to balance supply and demand. There will be very low likelihood of continuous pork price increase. And also the international factors are ebbing away. With the international recovery, the main economies are tightening their monetary policy. So the commodity price index is going down generally in the world, added by the price stabilization policies in China, and the energy price increase will be helpful to stabilizing the price index of the other sectors. If we look at the PPI, it's 4.2%. That's 1.9 percentage points lower than the last month. So there will be some synergy effects. Our national economy is recovering, and demand is not supporting the increase very strongly. We are not taking very aggressive monetary policy, so there is no monetary condition for continuous price increase. Even in the short term, in several months, the CPI increase may look very high, but all year round, the CPI is maintained within a reasonable range, and we have very good reason to believe in that in the future. Next question. From the cover. Also a question about employment. The whole society is paying attention to employment. So for the youngsters, what's your take on their employment in the future? I have touched upon the situation of employment just now. In the early days this year, we have been shocked by the pandemic. So now the unemployment ratio is going down from a peak time. With the economic recovery and the policies taking effect, we have good reasons to believe the stabilized employment situation. And now, the youngsters' unemployment ratio is astonishingly high. But as I said, with the economic recovery, there will be improved situation because the restraints of the youngsters' employment will be relieved. And also there is a gap between the youngsters' expectation and the needs in the market. That mentality gap will be an influencing factor for the youngsters. But all in all, with the policies of stabilizing employment and the supportive policies for the youngsters' employment taking effect, the employment situation of the young people will be improved. But still we have to be clear-minded that in terms of the youngsters' employment, they are under huge pressure, so we must continue to work on those policy implementation. Next question. From CMG, Voice of China. As has been mentioned, PPI's effect over CPI is not that strong, but also according to PPI, now the demand is narrowing down. Will that influence our hitting the target of GDP all year round? So you're concerned about the year-round economic performance. In 2022, our economic development is extraordinary. In quarter two, we have conquered a lot of uncertainties to register the positive growth. That's really hard-won achievement. In next step, we must continue to push forward the economic recovery so that it could be maintained within a reasonable range. It's challenged. And internationally, the production chain, the geopolitical influence, and IMF and some other international organizations have lowered down their forecast of economic development globally, and international grain and energy supply is tight, so commodity price is fluctuating at a high level. The developed nations' inflation is also at a historical high. Under the inflation pressure, European countries and the US are tightening their monetary policy. That is adding risks to the recession of the global economy. And also it is a challenge to the flow of products. So we are facing more uncertainties from outside. Domestically in quarter two, because of the pandemic, in April, our economy was negative. And then because of the basket of economic policies in May and June, we are seeing a pickup of our economic performance. We registered positive growth in quarter two finally. But right now, our economy is still in the recovering stage. The lack of demand in the market is restraining our development. The enterprises are having a lot of difficulties in operation, so the fundamentals of our economic recovery are yet to be cemented. Even though we are facing so many challenges, we have huge potential and we have a broad area. So the fundamentals of looking up are not changed. So we must continue to stabilize our economy and control the pandemic. And we have reasons to expect a pickup of our economy in the future. First of all, we will continue to see how the policies of balancing economic growth and pandemic control take effect. The transmission of the viruses has been controlled, and the basket of economic policies is quite influential. With the joint efforts of all parties, the momentum of economic recovery is maintained. Secondly, domestic demand is going stronger. In terms of investment, the policies of stabilizing investment is surfacing, and there are some big projects under construction right now. The planned total investment is going up. That is conducive to infrastructure development. In the first 7 months, infrastructure investment was up by 7.4% year-on-year. Manufacturing sector is benefiting as well. A series of taxation and charge reduction policies are also conducive to the stable growth of manufacturing. In the first 7 months, the investment was up by 9.9% in the manufacturing sector. In terms of consumption, the employment is stabilized and people's income has been up. With a lot of consumption-friendly policies, the consumption is resuming as well, especially the home appliances and automobiles are being consumed on a larger scale. Those would further boost commodities consumption. Automobiles was up by 9.7% in July. And supply is guaranteed, especially in terms of basic necessity supply and power supply, water supply and natural gas supply. The pain points in the industrial chain and supply chain are taken out. So they will continue to support industries. With the resumption of production order, the service industry will embrace a warm season as well. Fourth, the high-level openness will deliver some dividends. Even with complexities internationally, our foreign trade is quite resilient. Foreign export is rapidly going up. In the first 6 months, it's up by 10.4% year-on-year. That's mainly thanks to our product competitiveness and also the inflation level internationally, so our exported products will have some strength. And China is opening wider. We are continuing the BRI and free trade area implementation. We are developing some new modes of foreign trade. In the first 7 months this year, our import volume was up by 9.8% with the BRI-related countries. With the basket of economic policies taking effect, the dedicated bonds will be put into use, and financial sector will be more supportive of the real economy, so our economy will pick up very soon. Thank you. Next question. We are seeing extreme hot weather in many places, and drought is becoming serious. So what is the impact of drought over production, especially the rice? Thank you for the question. Grain production is a common concern this year. According to our knowledge, right now, the early season rice is harvested. This year, the sowing area is stable this year, and because of the flood, in some places, early season rice production has been influenced slightly. It is forecasted that the production volume of early season rice will be leveled up with that of last year. The autumn grains will take up the majority of the total production volume. In Jiangxi, Hubei, the lake rice is in the sowing season, and the lake rice sowing area will be up, so we have good foundation of stabilizing production. According to the remote sensing technology, corn, beans, and some main autumn crops are having a very good growth. But because of the hot weather in southern China, in some hills and terrains, and places with poor irrigation technology support, they are suffering from drought. In northern China, lodging is a serious issue. According to the meteorological forecast, this year we have seen more frequent extreme weathers, so drought and flood are taking a dent. In August and September, the grain crops will be harvested, so we must pay close attention to the impact of the insects. We must better manage the field so as to control those pests. We must ensure the good harvest in the autumn season and stabilize the total grain production at 1.3 trillion. Next question. Consumption increase ratio is lower than that in June, and the pandemic is rebounding in some places. So will this undermine the consumption development in the second half of this year? Will there be more conducive policies to boost consumption? Thank you for your questions. In July, because of the impact of the epidemic outbreak, the retail sales volume was down compared to the last month. It's 0.4 percentage points lower than last month, especially because of the sales of traveling products. The marginal effect of the promotion policies of the automobiles and the oil price going down, the automobile and oil products have a consumption of 9.7% and 14.2% year-on-year. That's 4.2 and 0.5 percentage points lower than last month, and they contributed to 0.4% of the total sales. And secondly, in terms of some house-related retail sales, for example, home appliance, decorations, their consumption was down by 6.3% and 7.8% year-on-year. Even though the social consumable products are not sold at a higher speed, 11 different categories maintain a positive growth. For 7 categories, their growth ratios were even larger than last month. And there are several characteristics. First of all, for the basic life necessities, their consumption is going up. For the upgraded consumption category, it's speeding up. For example, beverage, it's up by 3% year-on-year. And as to jewelry, sports, entertainment, office, work, those upgraded products are up by 21%, 10.1%, and 10.5% respectively, higher than last month. Online sales are going up as well. Offline outlets sales are improving. In the first 7 months, the online sales were up by 5.7% year-on-year. That's 0.1 percentage point higher than the first 6 months. For the outlets retail sales, the decrease ratio is 1 percentage point lower than last month. And the service sector is improving. The catering business decrease ratio is narrowed down. Because of the pandemic control, there are more favorable policies. Traveling is booming, and consumption is reviving. In July, catering business income was down by 1.5% year-on-year, but the decrease ratio is already controlled. And the retail business is also up by 35.5% compared to the last month. And in some sectors, we are seeing some coupons playing a big role. With the economic recovery, people's consumption potential will be further released, and there will be higher willingness of consumption. People will finally return to their normal lives. Even though there are some restraints behind consumption, as long as we can coordinate pandemic control and economic growth, we can bail out some difficulty sectors and improve the consumption environment. So we believe that consumption will resume very soon to support economic recovery. Last question from the paper. In July, the industry increment above designated level is growing up, but we are seeing a slowed down turnover, and overstocking is a serious issue. How to improve it? Industrial growth is our common concern. First of all, about the industrial performance, I would love to give you a general idea. In July, industrial production is reviving as well. The increment is up by 3.8% higher than last year for the designated level, and there are several features. Mining, power, heating, water production and supply increase very fast. Because of the energy supply guarantee policy, the coal washing and coal production industry is growing very fast, further supporting the stable mining industry. In July, the coal washing and selection were up by 11% year-on-year. Because of the hot season, there is larger demand for electricity, so certain industries are booming as well. In July, electricity, heating, and water production were up by 9.5% year-on-year. That's 6.2 percentage points higher than last month. That's pretty aggressive. And as to equipment manufacturing, it's growing very fast as well. It's up by 8.4% year-on-year in July. Even though it slows down compared to June, it's still faster than the general industries above designated level. Automobiles industry was up by 22.5%. That's 6.3 percentage points higher than June. And for high-tech industry, its growth ratio is faster than the average. That number was 5.9% in July. And for computer, office work are going down, but for the other equipment manufacturing, for example, aircrafts, they continue to register double-digit growth. Raw materials manufacturing is going down. It's 1.6% lower in June, mainly because of the sluggish demand in the market. The metallurgical sector and processing sector were going down by 4.3% and 8.8% respectively. So we see a difference between different areas. The industrial chain and supply chain will be connected furthermore, so the market demand will resume. And now the enterprises are having overstocking issue that's not conducive to the benign cycle of the industry development. We will give further play to the dedicated bonds and infrastructure investment. We will further implement the consumption-friendly policy, and we will reduce the taxation and charges to reduce the cost of production for the enterprises. That will help to consolidate the basis of industrial recovery. Now, this is the end of today's presser. Thank you, Mr. Fu, and thank you, media friends, for your attention.